All right, so it's 7, so we're ready to get started. Welcome to a new Current Conversations. I'm Teresa Lagerman, Events and Community Manager at the Highlands Current. We're very excited to have Beacon Mayor, Mr. Lee Kyriacou, joining us tonight, making time in his hectic 2020 schedule to review this crazy year with us and look ahead to 2021. Our Beacon editor, Jeff Sims, is going to be conducting the Q&A, and I know he has some questions. I know everybody else has questions too. We will have as much time as we can for questions from the public. You can submit them using the Q&A button that you can find along the bottom of your screen, and we'll get through as many as we can. So with that, Jeff, Mr. Kyriacou, I'm going to leave it off to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Good evening, Mayor. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you, Jeff? Thank you, Teresa.
Doing well. Thank you for joining us. As Teresa said, we're going to kind of do a three-part thing here. We'll do a one-part review of some of the bigger issues in Beacon in 2020, one part looking ahead, some to 2021, and hopefully a third part with listener participation. As Teresa said, anybody and everybody submit your questions and we will get to as many of them as we can. I've got a handful of my own to get us started, and then as questions come in from listeners, we'll go to those and try to get as many of mine in, but we'll take listener questions first. My first really is to go back about a year from now. You had won the election, you'd been elected mayor. The dominant issue in the election of 2019 was development in Beacon. There was talk of, you had talked about controlling development so that we didn't have overdevelopment, and so that what happened here in Beacon was in concert with the city's character. Tell me, where do you feel like that stands? Because of what has happened in 2020, it feels like that issue has kind of not in the front of everyone's brains so much. But the city has done work with some building height regulations, bringing public benefits into the laws as far as for a 4-story proposal on Main Street. Just tell me where you feel like that is now a year later.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. The issue of the day a year ago was planning, zoning, and getting the quality of life that came with development right. And I'm the council zoning geek, so I wrote a pretty extensive document of the kinds of things I thought we needed. And we started working our way through it in the last term, and we've continued that into this term. And the last mayor and council got a lot of it done too. This year, while things slowed down, we have done some pretty significant things on that track. The most important one was we eliminated the right for 4th floors, right? It doesn't mean we've eliminated 4th floors. And that's important to understand because, Beacon is a city. We believe in density. We know that the long-term direction of the country, especially if you're environmentally minded, has to be increasing density in cities. It's also the way that our Main Street, which is very, very long, will survive in the long run. Those of us that have been here a long time remember the times where Main Street was moribund. So, but now that what we basically said is you don't get a 4th floor as a matter of right. What we discovered was people would automatically go for them. Now we're saying it's the discretion of the council with a special use permit in return for some public benefit. And we've listed those public benefits. So we're learning as we go. Additional commercial space, affordable housing, public space, a setback with a public area. So public parking. So we've enumerated a number of things that we're looking for. And we're getting one right now. There's an empty lot on 416 Main Street, the corner of Main and Skank, where they've proposed a building. There is a 4th floor on it, but it's stepped back far enough that you can't see it. And they're offering up both a corner opening to the building as well as a public space, as well as the floors would be commercial, so we can have the opportunity for live work. Those are all positives, and that's the direction we want to go. It doesn't mean we would approve them all, but that's how we got to do it. We also tightened up our historic preservation ordinance, which I think is a big step. And then down near the waterfront, we've also tightened that up and are setting up to create parklets and other opportunities to kind of draw people up from the train station up to Main Street. So all things we've done. And I think we're making progress there. We've got quality of life issues to work on as well. And you'll see us investing in quality of life in our budget.
Is there anything still on in the back of your head as a to-do there as far as development's concerned for 2021?
I think we've picked off most of them. I think one of the things we're gonna find. So we immediately started the Main Street Access Committee because one of the things people said the repercussion of density on Main Street was it's kind of tough for parking, and we're working on access. We're working on how do we deal with parking, and it is it's a weekend issue. It's not a during the week issue. I think they're going to conclude that some zoning adjacent to the Main Street zoning that encourages parking while still encouraging other development would be appropriate. And we're probably going to, invest capital in building some parking infrastructure. And I think we're going to have to because, Main Street doesn't have, no lot has enough parking. And we don't want there to be nothing on Main Street other than single stories, because they have to do their own parking. So that's a big step that we've got to work on. It's not so much the zoning as much as how are you going to do this? And I think that an approach would be that if a building doesn't have its own parking, it needs to contribute to the parking fund. That if residents living on Main Street want a monthly parking sticker with a spot, then you'll have to pay something for that. And maybe that somehow we collect something from tourism as well, and that we use that to fund collective parking as opposed to trying each one to do it on their own. And we have to see how it works. So
we've been in the midst of a development boom, in Beacon the last few years. Obviously, things have slowed down this year due to the pandemic. But I wonder how long something like that can go on. It can't go on indefinitely. And certainly in Beacon, there's only so much room,
Right.
About 5 square miles. Do you see something once hopefully the pandemic starts to recede, we hope in the new year, do you see things continuing, to speed up in Beacon?
So you're right that the big growth was with the urban renewal parcels that had laid fallow for 40 years. The city in the 60s, 70s, early 80s raised a lot of buildings and created these open spaces that they had hoped would get rebuilt right away and didn't. And I think we were very fortunate because it waited until we were a popular and kind of appealing to young people to come into the community, and then the building occurred. So the ones along Main Street and down along Beekman, those are all being built out now, so that can't occur again. Some of the buildings on Main Street will have some infill, right? The 416 was an empty lot. The building next door is a 1-story. That could easily go to 3, so there'll be some of that. But there's 2 major ones that are still coming. There's down by the train station, and we very thoroughly zoned what we're looking for there. And we think transit-oriented development is a important environmental approach to housing and where you want to put density. You could put people down there who don't have a car during commuting hours, right? Because they just walk on the train to go to the city. So that would be one area. The other one we got to look at carefully is the old Beacon, Camp Beacon Prison, which I don't think would be for housing, but I think would be really important if we're looking for jobs. So.
And I believe there's a project that received some level of approval from the state a year ago or so, and I don't, honestly don't know where it stands right now for like a bike facility and all sorts of, some farming over there as well.
Yeah, and we'll have to see what happens. There was something the state wanted to go ahead with. not sure what the status is. We kind of have to wait to see what the impacts are of the economy. But the other area we've had really good in development is along the creek. One of the changes that we made actually this year or at the end of last year is we said, yeah, you can develop along the creek where the old factories are, but it needs to have at least 25% commercial, which is, again, our move in the direction of trying to make it a live-work city and not just a bedroom community.
Right.
And we've been successful. We have one that's going up just off Main Street that is 50% commercial. And the builder said, can do. And it's a little bit challenging for a builder to commit to commercial. It's very easy to do residential. But we think that the demand is there and that we can move toward a live-work city, which I think all of us want.
Sure. So then, I believe this was in January, moving into 2020, shortly after you were sworn in and the new council was sworn in. One of the first things I remember you tackling was fire stations. There'd been talk for years about whether to consolidate, whether to upgrade existing stations, things like that. And it feels like a million years ago now, having an in-person city council meeting in January. But there was a decision made to go from 3 firehouses down to 2. And I believe there's an update there as far as how that's moving along.
Yep, we thought we were going to exit by April. What we needed to do, so one of our 3 firehouses, the one near Dogwood on East Main, which is called Beacon Engine, 2/3 of that building, the historic portion, is actually owned by the Volunteer Fire Company. And then the 1/3 newer portion is owned by the city. So it's a very unusual situation. And that particular volunteer company didn't have any active volunteers anymore. And that is the least usable of the houses. So right now, during the day, all our firefighters hang out at Tompkins Hose, which is the newer one on 9D. And they really respond from there during the day. At night, they go to their individual beds, 1 in each firehouse. Mm-hmm. We upgraded from 3 full firefighters, all 24/7, to 4. And at Mays Hook and Ladder, the one in the center of the city, we now have built a second set of bedrooms. And so we can house 2 firefighters in one station and 2 in the other around the clock, which is a much safer for them. And it's actually faster response times because 2 of them can respond much more quickly than 1. So we just announced that we're done with that, and we're going to be closing up Beacon Engine, and we'll be moving the equipment to either Tompkins Hose or Mays Hook and Ladder. Eventually, we expect to consolidate to a single firehouse. For years, there were proposals to build a new one, partly because the 3 volunteer companies didn't want to favor one company over the other. But when we got over all of that, Tompkins Hose can be renovated as a central firehouse at less than half the cost of building a new one. And so you'll see us moving forward with a proposal to do that. We have a little bit of land to acquire from the church next door. Once we do that, the plans will be put on the table, and we'll move from 2 to 1 probably in the next 4 or 5 years.
And Beacon Engine, once the fire company is out of there, has it's a gorgeous historic building. And I think there'd been some talk of, doing something as far as not a museum, but some sort of a public building there. And that may still be.
Yep, I think it would be great. It is a wonderful historic building, and would love to see some sort of use like that. The main historic structure is owned by the Volunteer Fire Company. They are a private entity. My understanding is all 3 volunteer fire companies are talking now, possibly about using that site. That I don't want to speak for them, but that I think would be very interesting. I think a museum of sort would be great. I think maybe working with Historical Society as well, so maybe it's not just fire, maybe it's all a beacon, are all good ideas. And while we don't control the one building, we control our piece of it, and we certainly want to figure out how to do that. We can't give a public asset to a private entity, but we could certainly find some sort of win-win and community benefit. So I'd love to see that.
Okay. So then that's January. We were talking about fire stations. Shortly thereafter, the pandemic hit and everything changed, obviously. You know, your first year as mayor will be one you'll never forget.
All hell broke loose,
That's one
right?
way of saying it.
Right. I mean, who'd have thought first we'd have this health crisis, creating this economic recession, and then, create a second one with basically a new civil rights movement. And yeah, so it's been a pretty amazing year as a first year as mayor. I kept thinking I've done 18 years on council. How hard can it be? And I just didn't foresee any of this.
Mhm.
And we spent a lot of the first few months trying to figure out how to keep things open. We never closed anything down in the city other than our recreation classes, because classes had to shut. But we kept City Hall open, we kept the building department open. Obviously, we kept water, sewer, police, fire, everything going, and we kind of figured out how to do it while other town halls were just shut. It's like not doing it, and we did it in a way that our workers felt safe. Um, we very quickly went to electronic billing for bills, for water bills. We made people come up to the window so that we could always have that safety element, whether it was for building department or for anything else. That was early on. We had to do lots of encouragement of the community to kind of, keep everyone safe and to do our part. I think we've done an exceptional job in Beacon. I know our numbers are up recently in the county. Ours are not up to the same degree as the county. I think we're doing better. We've got 30 active cases, so it's not zero, but our peak was around 150, and we're nowhere near that. And the county's over 1,000 now. So things are tough right now, but I think the community has really, really done their part, and I'm appreciative of their willingness to kind of do that part.
Is there anything that the city will do differently over the winter? Everyone is saying that the winter is going to be really tough before it potentially gets better in the springtime. Is there anything that the city will do differently other than just encouraging people to continue to wear masks, follow the guidelines, social distance, etc.?
Yeah, we take our lead from the governor, who I think we're incredibly fortunate to have had Governor Cuomo at the helm right now. I think he's been steady and honest and, kind of moving in the right direction. If they impose additional requirements, if we end up in what's called a red zone or a yellow zone, we may look to see what additional things we can do, but most of it is just going to be following the lead from the governor. If we were a more divisive community and we had arguments over use of masks, maybe we would do something, but we haven't had to do that. So we'll see on that front. Some of our departments can't work remote, like the highway department. It's not a remote job.
Sure.
So we may have some impacts on that, but we'll see.
How are you feeling for 2021? I'll even put you on the spot a little. Do you personally feel optimistic? And then really a two-part question. What's your take on how a Main Street, small businesses recover after something like this?
Yeah, that's the absolute hardest part. I think our Main Street businesses are hard hit. We are lucky that we still get tourism coming up. We got to coax them all to follow the routines in terms of social distancing and masks. But I think that helps some. But summer's over. I think winter's going to be tough on businesses. I think some of the restaurants have already kind of shut down for the winter. And we've got a county grant program running that we're doing here. We're hoping that those are micro business lending. We're hoping that will help a little. It will get better next year. We will get our vaccinations, and it will start to return to normal. But it's going to take into the summer. But I am optimistic because we're moving forward at least, and I think we will get there.
Okay. I see one question has come in from a listener. I'm going to go ahead and ask that and put my stuff on hold, and we'll come back to it if we can.
Sure.
Someone is asking, can you give an update about the search for a new police chief?
Oh, sure. So, I asked Councilmember Terry Nelson to chair a committee. he and I selected committee members. We always agreed on who should be a member. And then they've been meeting. They're in their final stages. So, they put out they collected input on what people wanted. They put together the right circular describing the kind of person we were looking for. They solicited resumes. They've interviewed folks. They have sent me 2 names, and I'm just reviewing them now. I think they're meeting again tomorrow, just to kind of tie up some loose ends, and then we'll move forward from there. So I think we're a week or so away from being able to extend an offer and see if we can reel the person in.
Okay, so is it reasonable to think sometime early in the new year we could have a new police chief?
Yeah, I think we will. We hopefully will have them start by then. I think we will announce where we're going and hopefully, get a yes and get them started. And I'm very pleased with all the work they've done. They basically look to be all in agreement. I've been debriefing with individuals, and they're all saying very similar things. Very happy with the process. It's been the most diverse involvement of the community, and I've kept my distance because I trust Terry. We gave them a resource in terms of a recruiter. We have some city folks on there, but it's mostly community members and a very diverse group, and I think they've done a great job. So I trust their judgment.
Great. Here's another question. Are you getting involved in planning? I think you means the city. Is the city getting involved in planning for the Fjord Trail connecting Beacon to Cold Spring? What is the status?
So yes, we are. So the Fjord Trail is the one that's connecting Cold Spring to Beacon. They are focused right now on the Breakneck area. That's the first place they're building, and I think that's appropriate. And they got to build around the tunnel and improve the Breakneck train station stop. So that will be an awesome addition. I think they're going to actually improve the hiking trailhead as well, because it's heavily used. But as we're thinking ahead, the important part about the trail is how does the trail cross Fishkill Creek into Beacon, and how does it connect to our trails? And that's where I'm very, very interested in it, and have taken an active role in working with them. I have said to Metro North, which wants to talk to us about issues like the development at the train station, I said, I really need you to help us figure out how the Fjord Trail crosses Fishkill Creek. The other important part is I want to figure out how the Fjord Trail connects to the Tyranda Bridge. So the Tyranda Bridge is that place where there used to be a bridge, right at the end of South Avenue. And the council is committed, at my recommendation, that we will build a historic replica as close as we can, and that we will use components that have been saved. It won't be exact, but it'll be a 1-lane bike and pedestrian and hiking bridge with emergency access for a fire truck and other emergency vehicles, but only on emergency. And that is actually cheaper than the original plan of building a 2-lane road, and is the linchpin of our trails. And so I'd love to see the Fjord Trail connect. There's some issues in terms of private property to work with, but there might be other ways to do it. I've personally scouted out an alternative route that might work, and I've asked the Greenway Trail to kind of get involved in that. I'm asking Scenic Hudson to look at connecting that trail not only across Fishkill Creek, but also to our historic bridge, because once that bridge is up, that will get our hiking trails all connected. I'm also proposing a new Greenway Trail on the other side of Fishkill Creek. We've got one planned on the northwest side. I'd like to see us have one on the southeast side from that bridge up to 9D, so you could do a trail loop.
You mean a new section of the trail, or something new, entirely new?
Yeah, so an entirely new section, because the trail was going on the northwest side of the creek all the way up to Main Street and then beyond. So this is saying, once it hits the Tyranda Bridge and we rebuild it, I'd love to see cross the bridge, and instead of going up the northwest side of the creek, you go up the southeast side, and you can take that up to 9D. So that would put you through Craig House and eventually the animal shelters, and then up Simmons Lane. And it looks doable. Engineers are saying it's okay. The main property owner is Craig House. They're interested. They think it fits with what they're planning. And so we'd love to see that extra piece so you can kind of see our hiking trails really grow.
Great. Here's another one. What do you think about the recent proposal from Neil Zuckerman in Putnam County to have Metro North charge a flat fee between Grand Central along the Hudson rather than higher fares the farther that you travel?
So that's interesting. I'm unaware. I certainly know what my monthly fare is from Beacon into the city, and the first digit is a 4 in terms of hundreds. I think it's 475. You know, if it makes Metro North's numbers work, great. You know, I don't know how that will affect incentives. Like, you know, if it's the same price, people who are closer in may think they're being charged too much. But I'm certainly willing to look at it. Obviously, we will have some say in terms of input, but we're not the decision maker. So, you know, interesting. Probably would affect me because I expect to go back to the city someday, and we're far enough out where I'm paying the higher price. So that would be interesting.
Okay. Here's a question that was emailed to me earlier in the week also. So I'm going to just paraphrase. I think part of it is kind of more for the planning board. It's a concern about the Highlands, the Beacon Views condominium complex, the proposal that's before the planning board right now. So there's some specifics about that particular project, but I think kind of the essence of the question is not wanting Beacon to turn into a big, unfriendly, and congested city. The writer says this could eventually happen unless the city seriously puts a cap on new developments. I think they're talking about congestion, speeding, traffic, and whatnot related to that project in particular. But you know, how about we talked about development a minute ago anyway, but what do you say when you hear a concern like that some stuff is coming in that doesn't fit with the character that we have?
Yeah, you know, it's that balancing act. So I'll be honest, which is I believe in cities. I believe that cities should have density, and I believe our density should be on our main street, heading down to the station, and then selectively along the creek in the old factory sites. That's where I think density belongs. No one is proposing any density in the core residential neighborhoods. Now, to do it correctly, you've got to deal with parking and traffic on Main Street, which is why the first month in office, we established a Main Street Access Committee. The other one that always has had traffic problems is 9D heading out at commuter times.
Sure.
The state has put in smart traffic lights. They have not been put to the test yet, but as I understand it, the lights will stay green longer heading north during commuter homebound hours, and that is supposed to help the situation. I hope it does, because we've been lobbying them for a while, and that's what they think their solution is. We may need another one in the long run, but I'm hoping that we'll start to deal with it, because the repercussions of development, well, we get additional tax revenue, that's great. We get the ability for our businesses to survive, which they failed to do a generation ago, and we just need to make sure that they will thrive. So those are the things you need it for, but then you have to balance, you know, is the traffic so out of control that it's basically a negative on our quality of life? And that's why the Main Street Access Committee's got to do their work. That's why 9D has got to improve, and other things of like that, because the benefits of that in terms of tax revenue lets us do things like improve rec programs, beef up our parks, do other parts of kind of community services. And we do want those. So it's that balancing act of getting it right.
Well, that leads nicely into one of the other things that I had on my list, so I'm going to skip to it. The council just approved the 2021 budget a couple of nights ago, and that, like you said, there is a balancing act that has to be, that's a pretty delicate act there, because you're working with some additional revenue coming in from development in next year's budget. The council was able to add a handful of some programs and some kind of initiatives that were requested uh, by residents because they had seemed to me because they had a little money to work with. So maybe you just give for people who might not be familiar, just give a little overview of what was adopted on Monday night, and then we'll go from there.
Yep. So the budget, the city's main budget, not counting water and sewer, is about $22 million, of which about half, about $11 million, comes from the property tax. There's a state law, the tax cap, which puts some limits. You can go over it, but you're encouraged to stay under. We could have raised our levy. That's the total tax amount. That's that $11 million, 1.7% on the cap, which is about $200,000. We also, because we had new development, we had new properties adding to the tax base. That allowed us to increase the levy by about $300,000 this year, about 1.5%, maybe about 250, somewhere in there. So that's that benefit from the new development. You can get that extra tax revenue without asking others to pay more. In the end, my proposed budget was to use the extra revenue from new properties, but not to raise the tax. We ended up splitting the baby. So instead of going to the 1.7% increase of the levy for the regular homes, we did about a 1% increase. The total amount for a home assessed at about $300,000 is going to be in the $35 to $40 range. So it's not a huge number. I'm not pleased with it, but we kept it down below the cap. We can raise it some more next year if we need to. What we did with the extra funds, we have $70,000 for a mental health worker or other worker to assist with public safety as an alternative to policing. We have a study for municipal broadband. We have $25,000 for grants for food programs. We have some additional improvements to recreation in our parks. So we added a number of things that we thought are important to the community, part of that quality of life. And we're balancing, do we raise the tax this year or not? So we kind of did the halfway there, which I think is very fair. I think $35 to $40 will hit people on fixed incomes in hard ways, and that's a hard choice. I think others will think that's okay.
Okay. And there's two, I think there was two studies that were added. You mentioned one was the a study of a municipal broadband program and what that would entail, and then a study about recreation needs and possibly a community center one day.
Yep.
For people who are really interested in those, I guess the city would gather data sometime next year. What would be a next step after that once you've got a chunk of data coming in from surveys?
So, just to take the longer view, we have tripled the size of our recreation spend in the last 10 years in the city of Beacon, and no other budget has seen that kind of growth. So prior councils and prior mayors, including the councils I was on, were committed to that. We're just going down that path. And we might be at the stage where a survey would say our programs are in good shape. Maybe we think about capital expenditure like a building. But I think we'll find that additional programs are appropriate. We had some community groups like the Martin Luther King Center, which I'm very involved with and intimate with, that has gone away, the Beacon Community Center, and they did programs like mentoring. And we haven't really stepped in to fill that. I think we will discover that some of the recreational needs are okay, but other community needs are now the areas where we could grow or reestablish. I think we will find that. If we do, I think we should be investing in programs. And that probably should come first, and I think is more important than a physical structure. I think the other part we'll discover is, would we like a physical structure and at what point, and kind of lay in, because it's a big capital expense. I would love to see us use some of our historic structures. I have wanted reuse of historic structures since the first day I got on council. We have the Maze Hook and Ladder building, which eventually will be open once we consolidate to Tompkins Hose. We have the Memorial Building next door, which is a great asset. We have City Hall itself, which may open up. We have the Beacon Community Center over on West Center Street. And then we have the county building in the middle of Main Street, which I think over the next 10 years will also empty out. as potential assets. Most of them are on Main Street. So I think that there's a way to kind of figure out how to use those effectively. And it might be a community center, and it'd be interesting to see. I personally would love it. We have to figure out what are the order of needs, get programs first, and figure out how to do it in a cost-effective way. You heard what I talked about, the firehouse. You know, we could build a new one for 10 or 15 million bucks, but we could retrofit an existing one for far less. And that's oftentimes the right way to make the dollars go further.
It feels like if we were able to get some of that community involvement going on Main Street and some of these assets you're talking about, along with the development we've got on Main Street and then the thriving businesses, I mean, that would be a really nice mix of, you know, several different components of a good thriving community on our Main Street, if that were able to happen in the next, you know, however many years.
Yeah, and that's how we see it. The vision is multiple uses, right? We just don't want it to be the tourist gig on the weekend. We'll take the money, the businesses need it, but it's like, can we create kind of round the clock or everyday use on Main Street? And I think that will be, in the long run, far healthier for businesses, and also the way our community works. I love us to constantly be coming to Main Street.
Good. I've got two more questions that have been sent in. We're getting kind of close. We're going to let you off the hook at 7:45. See if we can get these in quickly. One person says, what's happening with Craig House development and any timetable there?
So we've seen a proposal from the developer. It's actually a pretty amazing concept. It is a hotel spa proposal with very involved in both preserving the main building and then building environmentally sensitive cottages into the land there. It would not use most of the land. It would preserve the Great Lawn, would preserve the main building. They would want to build, there's an extension to the main building that is a low rise. They would want to make it, you know, a couple stories higher, which is, you know, if you're going to give them any ground, it's already existing ground. You're not losing space. You're just letting them build up. So all in all, very interesting. We spoke to them about getting a greenway trail on that side of the creek across their property. That's almost half the distance on that side of the creek. Answer was absolutely, fits with what we want to do. So it's a very, very interesting proposal. You can probably see a video clip, you know, kind of glitzy video clip online. They obviously have slowed down a little bit this year, but I believe they will keep moving forward. And given the potential uses that are there, I think it's a pretty good one in terms of fitting the community.
But it has not gone to the planning board yet, so there's really no way to suggest any kind of a timetable.
No, I don't know that. I haven't talked to the builder. Hasn't come to speak to us in 6 or 8 months. They came early on, brought a conceptual plan to council. People were kind of wowed by it. It's just very interesting. But it's been in hiatus for a little while. I would bet it comes back next year.
Okay. And here, Mr. Mayor, you have somehow sent a question to yourself, because this next one, it says, comes from a zoning geek.
Must be another one.
Yeah. Okay, it says, I know the codes have been recently updated after a long drawn out process, but if you could add or change one more thing in our zoning code, what would it be and why?
Well, that's an interesting one. Have we gotten to where we want to get? We have a little bit more work to do on the what we call the linkage district. Kind of looked at that. I wasn't thrilled that we got kind of 3-story buildings right on 9D. Set back a little, but not a lot. I do like them. They're on my home street, so I'm pleased with them. But I think there's some tweaking we could do around getting down to the train station. More important than the zoning in that area, I would love to figure out, it's not a zoning issue, it's a planning issue. How do we create that entrance from the train station up to Main Street? Is it a set of stairs? Is it a set of small parks where we're talking to the Dutch Reformed Church about their cemetery? Do we acquire the cemetery, restore it, put a historic interpretive trail there? Those sorts of things. And so it's not so much a planning or not so much a zoning issue in that area as much as it is how do we plan this effectively to make people love walking from the station up to Main Street and to keep going? And how do we create the community asset that we get as a result? I'd love to keep working on that, and we've got some plans we're working on.
Okay. We're about to our time. Any concluding thoughts? Anything big that you're looking forward to in 2021? Major priorities? Anything on your mind for as we go into a new year soon?
Yeah, I'd like us to get back to some of the capital projects we've been talking about. I think we're going to move forward on restoring the Tyranda Bridge. That's a small project. I'd like us to be able to do Main Street improvements to work on parking. I'd like us to get started on that consolidation of the firehouse. If we can kind of put those in place, which are big capital spends, I think we can then turn to things like, a potential for a community center. The other area I'm looking forward to working on is I'm looking forward to getting our new chief and then starting up with some of the harder issues with respect to policing and community safety. We did the transparency stuff right away. We have one of the very few state accredited departments in the region. So we had a lot of already in place in terms of our policies and procedures. But things like, can I reduce the size of one of our shifts? How do we do that? Can we share dispatch with the town of Fishkill so that we both get an efficiency? Can we, how do we work in a mental health officer? How do we work with the county to get other resources that we can't afford because we're a small community, worked in with our community safety? So I think those things I look forward to. I certainly am not an expert, which is why we want a chief that has our goals to help us through that, right? Those are some of the things I'd like to work on.
And we didn't mention that, but in that same vein, Beacon and every other municipality in the state has a reform plan due April 1st, I believe.
Right.
On police
Yep.
reform plan.
And I think we're in good shape on that. And the other area, as we continue our development is just looking at affordability, right? We did, we sold off a parcel of land that we held next door to the municipal building, and we got 75% affordable units out of that. So there might be a couple more of those that we can do. There's a much better bang for bucks than trying to get 10% or 15% out of new builders. But instead, just find areas where you can get large percentages of affordable. So we're working on that too.
Maybe we'll even get lucky and start to have city council meetings in person next year again sometime too.
It would be good.
It would be fun to get off Zoom a little after, eventually.
Yep.
Okay, Teresa, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think we are just about finished.
Yep, excellent. We covered a ton in 45 minutes. Thank you so much, Mayor and Jeff. We're going to be posting a recording of this online, so anybody who missed it can be shared online tomorrow. And that's it. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.